Okay, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم بسم الله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to a special event hosted by the Muslim Youth Network. It's Islamophobia Awareness Month, and we're hosting this special discussion on Islamophobia so that we can understand sort of the experiences and the impacts of Islamophobia on our community. And alhamdulillah, we're joined by three very special guests. We have with us Brother Muhammad Rabbani, who is the Managing Director of Cage, and Ijlal Khalid, who's the Vice President of Higher Education at FOSIS, and Brother Aman Ali, who's the Head of Community Engagement and Development at MEND. So Jazakumullah khair for all of you for joining us. And I thought we'd start with getting a very quick overview from all of you about what your organization does, just for the benefit of the viewers, inshallah. So maybe we can start with Brother Aman.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for having me on today. So the organization that I'm part of is called MEND, Muslim Engagement and Development, and it's an organization primarily dedicated to tackling Islamophobia in the UK. And the two aspects or two areas that we particularly focus on is trying to get Muslims to partake in politics and political engagement in the UK, as well as engaging with the media. So that's just a quick intro to MEND.
Brother Rabbani, you want to go next?
Yeah, assalamu alaikum. Jazakumullah khair for having me here, and thank you to all the brothers and organizers at MYN. Jazakumullah khair. So Cage has been an organization focused primarily on what we call the war on terror. It's essentially the national security apparatus, both laws, policies, rhetoric, and everything else. And our job has been to keep a spotlight on how that is being used. And anytime there's violations, we document them and we call for accountability. So that's been generally our role. We also practically support people who've been caught up in let's say, arrests, raids, or become victims to those powers. And we're also very keen to investigate and research the use of those powers, so that again there's accountability and basic justice is at least respected. So yeah, amongst those things, that's what Cage has been doing.
Definitely. Brother Ijlal?
Barakallahu feekum for inviting me. Alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. So FOSIS, which is the Federation of Student Islamic Societies, we were formed in 1963, and we're the largest Muslim student organization in the UK and Ireland. We represent 120,000 Muslim students across the UK in both the HE and the FE sectors. We have about more than 100 affiliate ISOCs across the country, and we advocate on their behalf. We represent their voice. We develop Muslim students and Islamic societies, and we also provide them services. So that's largely what FOSIS as an organization does in a nutshell.
So I thought we'd start with hopefully an easy question, although we'll see. I wanted to get an idea from all of you. Obviously, you come from three very different organizations. So what does Islamophobia mean to you, and maybe to your organization? And how would you go about sort of defining it? Whoever wants to go first.
I think let me kick it off by kind of framing it in two parts from a MEND perspective. See it like an iceberg. You've got the tip of the iceberg, and then you've got the larger body of the iceberg, which is hidden and not visible. And so what Islamophobia is you've got the overt part, which is the kind of the online abuse, the hate crime on the street, the bullying in the playground, okay? But then you've got the hidden aspect, which is less kind of visible, under the radar. Things like employment discrimination, things like why your insurance premium is higher because you've got a Muslim sounding name, or you've got the rhetoric in the media and the rhetoric from politicians as well, which is not so much overt, but can be sometimes dog whistle or quite kind of covert language that's used to kind of undermine and be prejudicial towards Muslims and Islam in general. So see it in two parts. It's the overt, and you've got the hidden part of it as well. And then in terms of more technical definition, we've got a MEND definition as well. But that's kind of what I've just said summarizes what that definition kind of encompasses.
Yeah, I can go next if you want. So I think for us in FOSIS, when we talk about Islamophobia, you have to start with Islam. So in our eyes, it's Islamophobia is an experience which is rooted within religion. It's something that impacts us because of the religion that we follow. And it's the religion that we follow, the faith that we believe in, gives us the identity that we have. It gives us the practices that we engage in as well. So when we talk about Islamophobia, there's the first level, which is including Islam in and of itself. And these are things, you know, our aqidah, tawheed, iman, dogma and faith and belief and the values that we have. These are the things that, you know, make Islam Islam. So when we talk about Islamophobia, these things have to be there. And, you know, we talk about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the honor of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Quran. These are things which are in the epistemic phase, you know, which are to do with our ideology. And these things need to be included within a framing or conceptualization of Islamophobia as well. And when we talk about, you know, ourselves as Muslims, our identity is based upon a religion. So it's very much originated from us following Islam, following a faith, following a belief that makes us Muslims and gives us this identity. And that is the marker, and that is what we believe is the sort of, you know, main factor that leads to Islamophobia. And it's the same thing, you know, just to maybe give some context, a theological context or like a historical context. It's the same thing that, you know, when Nimrod put Ibrahim alayhi salam in the fire, when Bilal radiallahu anhu was under the rock and he was saying ahadun ahad, to the screams of Musab bin Umair radiallahu anhu in Mecca, the oppression that he faced at the hands of his own mother. And when Rasulullah was shunned by his own tribe and his people, it's the same experience of Islamophobia that we believe is being experienced in different ways within this day and age. And when we talk about, you know, in our context, in the FOSIS context, when we look at prayer rooms where being surveilled and monitored and shut down, when we look at universities, you know, having courses or academics which are criticizing Islam, which are, you know, sort of impinging on the rights of Muslim students when they have to engage with within the spaces that they're in because of prevent and you know, these Islamophobic state policies, when external speakers are not allowed on university campuses just because they are Muslim or they want to talk about Islam, when sisters are attacked for their hijab, or when Macron comes out and, you know, sort of, you know, attacks the honor of Rasulullah. These are all acts of Islamophobia in our eyes. So a framing or an understanding of Islamophobia, it has to be based on an Islamic, theological, historical, global understanding and context. But yes, it has to work in a local context. So we think global, but we act local. So, you know, for us, you cannot secularize the understanding of Islamophobia. You cannot bring in any other secular frameworks or ideas to conceptualize this reality. The framing of this experience of Islamophobia or the epistemology that it has to rely on has to be one that is enshrined within Islam and what the identity that it gives us from believing in Islam and the practices that we follow because of believing in Islam. I think that would be Islamophobia for me.
I think I agree with both brothers, what they've said. I'll just add from the Cage experience, Islamophobia, the most overt, the most obvious form of Islamophobia is the various wars that have been launched upon Muslim lands, invasions, occupations. Muslims have been killed en masse through the type of imperial kind of, you know, intrusion upon the Muslim world. So that's the most obvious form, which is direct killing, slaughter, murder, and it's targeted against Muslim nations. There is an ideological dimension to that. I cannot deny that. But I think also there are kind of economic and political reasons too. So that's the most obvious thing that we know of Islamophobia. Secondly, it is, of course, the war on terror is a whole package. And in our work and experience, we found that, unfortunately, many of the policies that were developed as part of the war on terror. For example, the rendition program, where Muslims were kidnapped from all across the world and then taken to prisons such as Guantanamo Bay or secret prison sites, more than 100 across the world. All of them were Muslims. It was targeted against Muslims. All of them, they were picked up different parts of the world, but they were all Muslim men and women too, children as well. If we look at the drone program that's been developed by the United States and then launched in places like Afghanistan, which is a theater of war, but then also in places that are not war zones, such as areas of Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia, just to name a few. All the targets were Muslims, and they've all been killing. These are assassination programs that have been running without any kind of control, any kind of oversight, any kind of accountability. So that's the hard end of Islamophobia that we see. It's a lived reality and experience of the generation of Muslims that have been growing up since the year 2000. And not to mention the torture and all the other things. The Western context, in the Western context, just a few manifestations I'll just touch upon. Islamophobia, in addition to what the brothers have said, I'll just add that the state institutions that are involved in dealing with Muslims in a discriminatory and prejudiced way, that is one of the most harmful forms of Islamophobia. And it's the point that Brother Aman mentioned, that the iceberg, that you can't tangibly see it, but you know it exists because of the effects of it. So quick examples would be William Shawcross became the head of the Charity Commission, and whilst he's the head of the Charity Commission, the number of investigations into Muslim charities triples. So that's Islamophobia, and that's state policy being used against Muslims in a discriminatory way, targeting them, depriving them of their freedom of association, of organizing, of speech, thought. And other examples would be Ofsted. Again, the Trojan horse affair. All these things are actually state policies. The entire concept of British values, which was then used to discipline Muslims and mark them out and use it as a factor to distinguish between compliant Muslims and problematic Muslims or extremist Muslims. It's Islamophobia in action, but at the state level. So that's what I'd only add. Inshallah, I think in the later parts of the discussion, we can have a discussion about the more global kind of manifestation of Islamophobia. I think the expressions are different across the world, and we do need to, inshallah, factor that in too.
Jazakallah khair. I think from what you've all said, the thing that is really evident is Islamophobia is really broad, and it's quite difficult to pin it down to one area of life, like say university or work, or it's so pervasive. It's quite difficult to sort of pin down and define, and that's probably been one of the challenges that we've had, is really defining Islamophobia. And obviously we know that there was that a Ppg definition of Islamophobia that's come out a while ago, and I'm just going to read it out so people aren't aware. So the definition by the parliamentary group was Islamophobia, which is now, I think, adopted, right? Or was it not adopted? I don't remember.
It's not been adopted by...
It's not been adopted, but it was proposed by this APPG, which is a parliamentary group, that Islamophobia is rooted in racism and is a type of racism that targets expressions of Muslimness or perceived Muslimness. And that was the definition that was given. So I just want to get your thoughts, given what you've said about Islamophobia. What was your reaction to this sort of proposal?
Like kick off?
Yeah.
Go on, FOSIS.
Sorry, go on, sorry.
Ijlal. No, go ahead, Akhi.
Okay, right. So I think for us, within FOSIS, we do take issue with this definition. We believe it racializes and secularizes Islam and the experiences of Muslims. We believe when we talk about Islamophobia, it is something which is rooted within religion. And just to caveat this, we don't say that race does not play any factor at all. We do believe that race has a factor to play. But when we look at the center point of the framing or conceptualization of Islamophobia, it has to be something that is based around religion. It has to be based on something that which does not really exclude Muslims or homogenize the experiences of Muslims across the board. And in our understanding, calling Islam a race takes away from our understanding and our framing of Islamophobia within the context of Islam, within the context of the religion, and it takes it away from the faith. And within the APPG's report, there were a lot of the experiences that were used and a lot of the information that came out, the experiences that were used were from a specific idea of what a Muslim looks like, some certain stereotypes as well. A Muslim is someone who is brown or dresses a certain way, and looks a certain way, or has a beard, and we believe like these markers cannot be used to sort of understand Islamophobia, because Islam is not a race. Islam is not an ethno-racial identity group. Anyone can be Muslim from any ethnicity or any background. So this is why it's important to understand these things on the level of the religion, on that epistemic basis. So firstly, we believe that this definition is quite exclusionary. The second thing is, it doesn't conceptualize or take into account the very real cases and experiences that we see Muslim students on the ground experiencing. Things around prayer rooms being shut down or surveilled, things around external speakers not being allowed to speak to Islamic societies and students there, course content which is Islamophobic, sisters wearing the hijab and being attacked. These are not things to do with a person's race. These are not things to do with a person's ethnicity. These are things to do with the person's faith and the practice of that faith and the identity that they take on as a result of believing in Islam and being a Muslim. So I think, yeah, for us, it secularizes things and it sort of, racializes things as well, which is where we find the main issue with this framing. And I mean, later on, I can talk about the process of the APPG and how we feel, these things should be led. But I think for now, this is the main crux of our sort of issue or problem with the definition.
Anyone want to jump in on that?
Maybe, I don't mind. I'll just mention a couple of points. I think the APPG definition, there's many definitions out there. Before the APPG and after the APPG, Runnymede published a definition. MEND actually have their own definition. And the APPG definition is an attempt to try and describe Islamophobia. I think where there's a few ways of looking at this. One is pragmatically, do we need a definition? And I have to say the Cage position is a little bit more cautious. We think that having a definition adopted officially, there are risks with that. And I can go into this inshallah in a bit. But firstly, just the concepts that are communicated in that definition. There's the positives are that it's a definition that is succinct. It tries to talk within the context of Britain and British society. If you look at the history and the culture, it is a society based on racial prejudice, and that's undeniable. It's a society that has achieved great power and influence in the world through exploitation of people on the basis of race. So the great amount of wealth and political power that Britain enjoys today, a large part of it could not have been achieved without imperialism and its history of colonialism. So from that angle, linking it to race, I can see the benefit of that, and probably why the people who actually put this forward did that. Race is one of those topics in British life, which is it's a sort of red line when you in conversation, but obviously in practice it's still a racist society. But it is one of those things that no one wants to be called a racist. And once that sticks, it's going to be very, very problematic, at least if you're trying to be respectable. Now, the issues, of course, with it are threefold, in my opinion. Firstly, if the caveat is placed that this is about particularly the British experience and the British context, then I think we can do away with some of the criticism. But nevertheless, let me mention them. One is something that we've submitted to the APPG at the time 2 years ago, and it is our concern that the definition may not adequately cover the Islamophobia that emanates from the institutions of the state and its decisions and its influence in society. So we have to wait and see if that happens, but we've got our concerns. So any definition of Islamophobia must include the Islamophobia that is carried out through state policies and laws and so forth. The second concern is the one about race is you get into problematic kind of waters if you start expanding your view, and if the assumption is that we live in a globalized world and conversations and debates, policies and decisions, they're all interrelated. So I'll quickly illustrate my sort of contention with this. In India, Muslims are being en masse discriminated against. There are laws being passed which are anti-Muslim laws. But Indian society, the Muslims, they are Indian. They're actually, there are obviously ethnic differences within India, but they're all Indian Muslims. And some of these debates, the Muslims of India had them at the time of partition, decades ago. Like, are we Indian or are we Muslim? And should we organize our society based on religion? Should we organize it on the basis of ethnicity? So they're actually much more familiar with this debate than we are, even in Britain, right? So my point being, they're not being targeted because of race. They're being targeted because of their religion. They are a religious community, and the Islamophobia they're facing is based on religion. If you look at, we can complicate it further by talking about some of the decisions and policies of the Middle Eastern dictators and autocrats. They are Muslim, they are Arab, they are implementing Islamophobic policies. Now, how do you then explain that through an idea of race? You can't. When, for example, the UAE Council of Fatwa issues a decree just the other day saying that the Muslim Brotherhood is a terrorist organization, that is Islamophobia in action. But it's not based on race. It's not based on ethnicity. It is purely based on suppressing Islam and the expression of Islam. So hence, I think, in conclusion, I'll just summarize that very difficult to come up with a definition that's going to be agreeable and workable. You do, in the end, have to take context into account. I think from a pragmatic sense, a definition is needed. But I also welcome the debate, the critique. That should be on record, and that's good. So I don't necessarily see both of them as exclusive. Jazakumullah khair.
I think if I just illustrate the main position in regards to the APP definition. So our position is that the government should adopt the APP definition, but the caveat being that there's certain kind of guidelines that it needs to be adopted with, in conjunction with, and that bit is crucially important, because if you look beyond the definition, which I kind of trying to give my interpretation of why it's kind of based in racial identity, is that in the UK context in particular, protections given to racial communities are much greater than those given to religious communities. And just to give you one example, when it comes to incitement towards racial hatred, if it's likely that racial hatred was likely to occur, then that's sufficient for prosecution. But when it comes to religious incitement, then in that case, according to UK law now, the threshold is a lot higher. And the requirement is that the intent of the person has to be proven in order to prosecute, which is a lot more difficult to do. So you've got intent that needs to be proven, and then you've got likelihood. And so the protection given to racial communities in the UK context is far much greater. And I think what the APPG wanted to do was benefit from that utility that it has by identifying it under race. Having said that, I think when you look at the report that the APPG published, and so you've got the definition, but the wider report as well. And one of the things that was really promising, a point that they made, which was actually an excellent point, which is that there's 3 factors that need to be considered when it comes to defining Islamophobia. And that is the process of Islamophobia, the actions that qualify as Islamophobic, and then the impact of it as well. But what we see in the actual definition itself is that it's lacking in that. So the APPG recognizes that it needs to have these 3 factors considered in it, but the definition, the shortened definition that they have now currently doesn't fulfill that utility. And therefore what we at Mend are advocating is that you adopt the APPG definition, take that for what it is, but in conjunction with guidelines which elaborate upon those 3 factors which the APPG itself recognized. And I think the best example to give it is PREVENT as the PREVENT strategy. So the PREVENT strategy doesn't explicitly target Muslims, okay? It doesn't specify or mention expressions of Muslimness. If you take the APPG definition, it doesn't mention expressions of Muslimness or perceived Muslimness. And so if you apply the APPG definition to PREVENT, then you wouldn't be able to say that it's Islamophobic. But if you take the MEND guidelines into context and a wider kind of appreciation for Islamophobia, then you do find that actually PREVENT as a policy is institutionally Islamophobic. So that's kind of our position on it. It's a good starting point. Kind of having it rooted in racism has utility, and I completely kind of appreciate the Ijlal's point about kind of wanting it to be rooted in religion, but I do appreciate that aspect of it being rooted in racism. But also, from the MEND perspective, obviously our focus is tackling Islamophobia in the UK context, and we get numerous, because obviously we have the Islamophobia response unit, which records incidents of Islamophobia, which assists victims of Islamophobia as well. And for us, one of the priorities that we have, of many priorities when it comes to Islamophobia, is being able to rightfully prosecute actions which are Islamophobic, and to have legislation and policies in place which allow that to happen. One, to be a deterrent for society. And why do we have penalties in the first place? It's a deterrent. And so we haven't got sufficient deterrents currently right now. And so we need that utility in terms of the guidelines in order to elaborate upon the comprehensive nature of Islamophobia. So things like PREVENT, things like the employment discrimination cases, things like your insurance premium being different because you've got a Muslim sounding name, these all need to be captured. And that utility is one of the priorities that has to be at the forefront of the definition.
I think that's a great point. Actually, Aman mentions that balance between, trying to get it conceptually right, but also looking at the impact and implication of that. So I wonder if actually the debate that why things get confusing is maybe the discussion is about what is Islam and not what is Islamophobia. I don't know if that's probably one of the issues, because if we have an issue in defining what is Islamophobia, but have a clear understanding of what is Islam, perhaps we can navigate around it. So, like, I do feel that there's a structure, a culture of racism that this society is built on. Now, Muslims are in this period of history, they're a kind of a new thing, in Britain. So Islamophobia is a layer on top of that structure. So to that extent, I completely agree. But if you go to if your starting point is conceptually, intellectually understanding the phenomenon, then obviously a definition will be constrained. So yeah, I mean, I just think that we can. It's an important debate, and I think MEND are in an important position. They are the premier organization here in this country, working to combat Islamophobia. And naturally, they'll have a much more nuanced and detailed view on it.
I think, yeah, just from my angle, I think I would add that in our understanding, this has to be community-led. It has to be grassroots-led. And any conceptualization on framing shouldn't try and make experiences or cases or instances of Islamophobia fit within pre-existing conceptualizations and framings that already exist on defining discriminations. we, as a Muslim community, we need to exercise some courage within this process to originate framings and conceptualizations from what is experienced on the ground, from what cases are there, to use those, independently research those, to then create framings and conceptualizations around that. And I think this is where, you know, I agree with the, I not agree, but I see the pragmatic approach that is taken by certain institutions to say that, yes, you know, it's a good starting point, but, you know, we need to include stuff. But I think from my position, it's the fact that whenever we are trying to, we accept something which comes from a framing or a secular framing or a framework or an epistemological basis which exists outside of Islam, or does not conceptualize the experiences of Islamophobia in its entirety. We create that framing and then we try and make experiences fit into that framing. We're never going to have a definition which the entire community can get behind. The only thing that the entire community can get behind is Islam. You know, when that's the faith that we all believe in, that is the religion that we all believe in, and those are the things that lead to the experiences of Islamophobia on the ground. So it's understanding those experiences, those instances, those cases of Islamophobia that the grassroots deal with, that Muslim students, for us in our case on the ground, deal with, understanding those on their level, and then using something as a conceptualization or a framing to you know, quantify that discrimination, to conceptualize that discrimination. That is how I think the process should flow, because otherwise, you know, we're going to have a situation where, and I think Rabbani made this point earlier, that, you know, this is not going to ever allow us to problematize in a certain way state-led Islamophobia as well. It's very important, you know, and this is the experience of Muslim students on the ground. When you have OFS on the back of students' unions to police Islamic societies more, to surveil prayer rooms more, to implement the prevent duty, where Muslim students cannot access the same level of welfare support, well-being support from mental health service providers and counselors within the university, when they can't engage with their course content because they're scared of what they might say, when they're being asked to hand over, you know, the names of their Islamic society members within the FE and HE sector, when they're not allowed to have Islamic literature that is approved by the university or their college within their prayer spaces, then all of these we need to use those experiences to come up with a conceptualization of Islamophobia. And a state-led interpretation of Islamophobia would not allow us to problematize those things. And for us in the education sector, because that's where, you know, we as FOSIS work with Muslim students, we need a definition of Islamophobia that, you know, as Muhammad Rabbani said, like, you know, the thing that we can agree on is that we're all Muslims and we follow Islam. Yes, you know, it might be good to define what is Islam for all of us, but that's the first thing that we can all agree on. That's the faith, that ideology and that belief is what gives us our identity and the practices that we follow. But then more than that, we need to use those experiences to understand that we need to create a framing that's based on theology, that's based on history, that's maybe fits in with this global context as well. But then it allows us to problematize those experiences that Muslim students are having on the ground, or, you know, in the wider community, Muslims are having on the ground, that allows us to problematize those things as Islamophobia. If you have a definition of Islamophobia, which might be academically sound with pre-existing academic literature and other framings of discrimination for other groups of other marginalized groups of people, if we want to link up our oppression with that, then in an academic framing, you might achieve something which, you know, within academic communities, you have complete buy-in from. But if we want to have a framing that a layman, a lay Muslim on the ground can understand and conceptualize their oppression and what they experience day in and day out in those terminologies that, you know, they experience their Islam, they conceptualize their Islamophobia in. If we want something that is, you know, fit for purpose on the grassroots, that emerges out of the experiences of Muslims, that emerges out of the experiences of what people experience as a result of following Islam, then we need a framing and conceptualization that is originated from and built upon that. We can't have other framings, other conceptualizations, and we're always trying to make our oppression fit in somehow. And I don't think a state-led initiative is going to guarantee us a definition that will enable us to problematize those experiences. This doesn't need, after creating a definition or a consultation or whatever, you try to create community buy-in, you try to create community support around it. This has to originate from the community. This has to originate from the grassroots. This has to originate from those experiences and originate from Islam. And this is why we say it's rooted in religion. But yes, I agree with what Muhammad Rabbani said, like, yes, there is an element of race attached to it. But, Muslims in this country, again, are not all from an Arab or an Asian descent. We have Muslims from all different backgrounds. What happens to their oppression? And even, state-led issues like prevent and all these other things, wearing the hijab, all of these things, these are lived realities for, Muslims from all different racial backgrounds and ethnic backgrounds. If we take this idea that, and I think, yes, to a certain extent, we can say that Britain is built upon a racialized hierarchy, and that's what the imperialist power has sort of embedded within the structures of the country. But what happens to white Muslims then? How do we conceptualize? And again, academic framings might allow us to conceptualize certain elements of what we might think fits in with these definitions. But we need to defer to the grassroots. We need to ask those Muslims, how is it that they define their oppression? And I think that's where, Muslim voice, and in our case, Muslim student voice, is the most important thing, because those grassroots organizations and those Muslim, Islamic societies, in our case, are representative of the Muslim student voice on the ground, as are other community organizations for the other Muslim voices on the ground. So I think, yeah, that's largely where I would find another issue with this framing and conceptualization as well.
Exactly. I'm sure we could go on a lot about issues with the definition, but I had a question just from sort of a layman. One of the things that surprised me, because when this definition came out, a lot of people talked about how, like you mentioned, it wasn't going to be useful in addressing those structural systemic sort of Islamophobia, as is the sort of, as Aman mentioned, sort of that the bit below the iceberg that's visible. But then why was the government so reluctant to accept it, even in its current form, if that was something that would allow them to sort of not deal with it? So why the difficulty in getting this accepted is sort of my question to you.
I think because it's going to be, even that is too much for them. Even such a definition would potentially invite criticism, and that's actually what police said in their responses. They said that you're going to put us into trouble if you accept this definition. There's some things that we won't be able to do. That's the honest truth. So any type of, as soon as you name the problem, as soon as you can say this is the problem, have the definition, you can then begin to organize around it. You follow me? It's like the idea of extremism. Like, why is it such a powerful stick? Because it doesn't have an agreed definition, you see. But as soon as you name it, then you know, okay, that's the target, and that's what we're going to be now either evading from one perspective or hitting from the other perspective, right? And Muslims, for example, could then start saying, hold on, this definition of extremism, you are misapplying it, or you're applying it in a discriminatory manner. So they don't come up with a definition, right? So, but this is the problem. This is their problem of if they adopt a definition. So that's just how bad the situation is, from where I see it.
I think the best analogy for me is 110 meter. It's 110 meter, isn't it? Hurdle race. So right. If you get past the first hurdle, then you're more likely to get to the second hurdle and third hurdle. And if you stop at the first hurdle, you're never going to progress to the end. So from
yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's an important point, Aman, and I obviously agree in principle. The tricky thing is that sometimes when you're making that progress, you may end up actually taking a couple of steps back without realizing it. So it's just having the wisdom to make those choices such that we don't entrench something that will then be very, very difficult to uproot, once it's got the sign off. So I personally feel that all of these efforts are going to happen in a very organic and natural way, and it's healthy to have different perspectives. So K's perspective will be and should remain that any definition, given the current political context, given the fact that Islam is so maligned, and from wherever you sit on the political spectrum, there is benefit to be gained by continuing that hatred and hostility against Islam. We think that any definition is going to be problematic. And I think Cage should insist on that, and that should add to the debate. And equally, I think there are going to be efforts to try and formalize a definition, and there'll be benefits to that too, I think.
I think just to add to that point, and I completely agree that, in trying to win that marathon, we don't want to do something that makes us take a few steps back. And this is what is happening from our perspective as FOSIS on the ground right now, that Islamic societies, student unions, universities are being asked by certain organizations, certain scholarship awarding organizations, as well as certain other community organizations to accept this definition, where in fact, if that definition, this definition is accepted, none of the experiences of Muslim students on the ground we would be able to say that this is Islamophobic. So if, university, I think it's very important to understand how universities function here as well. If Muslim student voice is not at the forefront of rejecting or accepting these definitions, if that process is not led by Muslim student voice, which are the representatives of the grassroots, if that voice is not taken into account, and this definition, which is happening in some cases, is imposed by staff members, quote unquote Muslim staff members, who might see their identity as being Muslims more of a racial, cultural, ethnic thing, but are actually Islam critics in a lot of cases themselves, people from university equality teams, academics, if they enshrine this definition within the education sector and within universities and student unions, Muslim students are not going to have anything added to their experience by having this definition present within their context, because none of the experiences of Muslim students, which are around them being discriminated against because of the faith that they follow, not because of their race, and it's a religious-based discrimination, none of that stuff is going to be problematized by the acceptance of this definition. But on the other end, universities and student unions are now going to come out looking like the victors, saying, we've accepted this definition on Islamophobia. They're going to now publicize that fact. They're going to get other universities to accept that definition, and student unions to accept that definition as well. And that's it. The debate on what Islamophobia is and what Muslim students experience would then go away. These debates within university, these are neoliberal universities, these are for-profit institutions. They do not open up these conversations on how do we define the oppression that some of our marginalized student groups experience again and again and again. So if at this point in time, this definition is accepted, universities come out as, those institutions who are so altruistic and so virtuous that they've taken on this definition. But for Muslim students on the ground, they lose the discourse, they lose that, they lose the momentum, they lose all of the work that they do on the grassroots to conceptualize these things as Islamophobic. And none of these things in the future are going to be problematized within the universities or the education sector's context. So this is why we believe that, accepting it right now is not the best thing to do. And rejecting it is what gives empowerment to the Muslim student voice on the ground, and it defers the power to them, and they should be the ones leading this discourse and leading this momentum.
I think what's clear is there's definitely benefit to having a definition. Now, what that definition is, I think clearly is something that is still sort of hotly contested and isn't something we're probably going to agree on all today. But inshallah, there's steps that have been taken, and we're sort of on that journey to arriving at something which is useful, not just for that Muslim experience in campus, but also, as Rabbani mentioned, those structural forms of Islamophobia that we all face. I had another question, more sort of geared to sort of our practical reality. A lot of the time we hear about these parliamentary groups and these definitions of Islamophobia, but on a more personal level, as individuals, what can we do to combat Islamophobia? What are the steps that you would advise as sort of representatives of organizations that span quite a wide sort of range of Muslim experiences. What would you recommend that Muslims, probably especially young Muslims, what should we be doing to combat Islamophobia? Maybe we start with Aman. I think you're muted. If you want to come up.
Sorry about that. Yeah, so I think there's a number of approaches that can be taken. And I'm cognizant that we've got obviously a young audience who primarily listen to our podcast. So I want to make it as practical as possible. And I think, let me start with a few macro level observations and then kind of go into the practical steps that we can take. So as we mentioned, that Islamophobia is comprehensive in its nature. It's all encompassing, it kind of is very pervasive in our society. So whatever strategy we have needs to be comprehensive as well. So that's the first point I'd make. The second point I have is that every one of us in society, not just as Muslims, need to understand that the responsibility of tackling Islamophobia isn't just on the Muslims, but it's on all of society. So we need to be cognizant of that when we kind of have efforts, kind of organize to have efforts to tackle Islamophobia. Now, the third point, which now gets into the practical step, is that every one of us has, I believe personally, an individual responsibility to contribute towards tackling Islamophobia in the UK. And everyone has that part to play. Whatever context you might find it in, whatever circles of influences you have to use whatever opportunity you have available to you to highlight the issue of Islamophobia and to tackle it as well. Now, from a student kind of youth perspective, education's the kind of the natural place to start. And I know Ijlal probably can mention many things that FOSIS are doing to kind of raise awareness of Islamophobia and to tackle the issue on campus. But from a kind of a younger profile, starting from the school level, I think we need to introduce more kind of into the curriculum of the UK, be it through RE or PSHE or citizenship. The topic of Islamophobia needs to be more discussed. So if there's students here who've got younger siblings, they can get their parents to approach the schools and question them, oh, is Islamophobia being discussed when it comes to citizenship or any other appropriate lesson? Many young people from FOSIS are going to enter the job market very soon after they graduate. And so the issue of employment discrimination is a pertinent issue for those who are going to graduate in the coming years. And so what we've done, especially during the Islamophobia Awareness Month, is we've gone to organizations and we've had individuals who work at organizations deliver awareness presentations to their fellow colleagues, making them aware of what the challenge is of Islamophobia for Muslims in the UK. Because we have to remember, we're only 5% of the population. And 95% of the population isn't Muslim. So they're not going to have an appreciation for the nuance and the challenges that we face as a community. So we need to make them aware and also inform them of their responsibility in challenging Islamophobia as well and standing up and speaking out against it. So that's kind of another kind of practical step that anyone can take. And if you're wondering, okay, how can I do it? Aman's kind of mentioned a few examples, but how can I actually go about and what's the next step that I can take in order to kind of tackle Islamophobia? Well, my tip is we've got the Islamophobia-awareness.org website. And on that website, you have a number of resources that are free to download, which will allow you, anyone watching this program, to deliver a presentation, to deliver a talk, to organize locally, to find out more facts and figures and to do a bit more reading in this area so that you can become more informed. And that's the way my advice would be, that from the individual level to the macro level, how we can tackle Islamophobia.
Jazakallah khair.
Rabbani, I see you unmute your mic, so go ahead.
All right, Bismillah. No, excellent points from Brother Aman there, inshallah. I'll add, firstly, for me, it's mindset. So all the brothers and sisters who are listening, it's about how do you understand what's going on. So I'll make a couple of points. One, Islamophobia, yes, it's there. And yes, there are people out there who hate us. They hate Islam, they hate what we do. Sadly, that's a part and parcel of life. We have to be very careful that we don't internalize that. We should always remain proud of who we are. We should always remain grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for making us Muslim and appreciate the fact that we are Muslims. That yes, in the worldly sense, it's not maybe a pleasant society to grow up in as a Muslim, but we just have to have that barrier that we don't internalize that hatred. So we start actually weakening in our commitment to Islam or our appreciation of the fact that we are Muslim. Secondly, It is to remind ourselves that we are citizens in this country, and we have to absolutely assert our right to be free from discrimination. That is our absolute right, and we should assert that right. We should never accept and tolerate anybody treating us differently or discriminating against us on the basis of our deen or our color or anything. So that's also very important, because again, over time, what can happen is you can kind of get used to it, and you can kind of just say, actually, you won't even realize, but again, it's part of the internalization process that we need to be resilient against. Thirdly, there's also a bit of realism that we need to capture in our mind, in order that we don't fall into despair, because we could be making all this effort to try and give dawah, to try and remain committed to our values, our deen, our identity, and we might not see change. We might not see, the world around us is not actually changing. And as the years go by, it seems like actually Islam is still a football that everybody uses to sort of, bash Islam with so many different things. So we should be realistic. We should realize that these are all worldly, material harms. They don't actually constitute true harm. True harm is if your deen is damaged, and true harm is the harm that is everlasting in the akhirah. So we should remember that, yes, realistically, look around us, look at the geopolitics, look at the macro level trajectories that the world is undergoing. Is there real optimism around the corner that somehow Islamophobia is going to be wiped out? I think we'll all agree that it's not really there. Okay, so what do? We adopt a resilient mindset. We again go back to appreciating that this world is not the be all and the end all. Lastly, okay, what can we do? Some of the practical things I just mentioned two. There's one at the interpersonal level. We as individuals, in all of our interactions, if we encounter people, non-Muslims, we should, through our connection with them, we should try to engage and try to give them a proper perspective. They have been primed by 20 years of propaganda. A lot of them, they are not inherently anti-Muslim, okay? But it's been manufactured. A consensus has been manufactured in society by some people, and they're not many. So what we have to do in our interpersonal interactions is try to, inshallah, give them dawah, interact with them so that they get a chance to speak to Muslims and understand the true nature of deen and our values and so on. And lastly, policy level, we have to, every chance we get, we have to speak out and complain. We have to record. We have to tell our stories. We cannot let this oppression go, and whatever that form is. So if, for example, your ISOC is being contacted by Prevent and is being told that you can't bring this so-and-so speaker, you shouldn't comply. You should say, no, you don't have a right to tell me which speaker I can bring or not. And then you should complain, right? So at that level, it's all about complaining and submitting, making sure that we push back, making sure that we speak out and not suffering in silence. That's not going to get us nowhere. So, yeah, Jazakumullah khair.
Yeah, barakallah feekum for that, Brother Aman and Muhammad Rabbani. I think I wouldn't disagree with a lot of the stuff that you said. I think for me, this is just an add-on, because I would say yes to all the things that the brother said as well. But from my angle, I think, on a FOSIS lens, I think I would say again, and I think Brother Rabbani mentioned some of these things as well. But again, conceptualize what you do as Muslim students on the ground, within the university space, or if you're active within your Islamic society, conceptualize whatever it is that you're going to do as an ibadah for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Imam Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah has this little extract where he defines different forms of ibadah. Ibadah is not just doing your salah or doing your zakah. Islam is much bigger than that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created a lot of opportunities for us to do ibadah, and advocating and being very active and serving resisting these institutions, serving your Muslim community in countering these discourses and these experiences and these institutional oppressions is a part of our ibadah, and that's the lens that we should have. This is purely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we are doing this. And again, this should be based on a lens that is influenced from the Quran and Sunnah. Muslims' episteme should be derived from the Quran and Sunnah. And that is, we know that the Sahaba radiallahu anhum did not back down. They experienced Islamophobia. The Tabi'een that came before us, the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, the Tabi'een, they all experienced Islamophobia. The prophets that came before us, before Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, experienced Islamophobia as well. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, I made them Muslims and I made you Muslim. They were all Muslims as well, right? So they all experienced Islamophobia. But what they didn't do was they didn't let that silence themselves. There was a time when I think again it was in a hadith it comes that a Sahabi radiallahu anhu came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and said, Ya Rasulullah, make dua for us because things are really hard for us. And this was in Mecca before the migration. The things are really hard for us. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, he became a little bit angry. He said, you shouldn't be saying that things are so hard on us and not doing anything about it. You should have confidence. You should do something against it. You should not silence yourselves. So I think it's very important, and I think Brother Rabbani mentioned some of this as well. That as an Islamic society, you should understand that an Islamic society is based upon Islam. It is the submission to Allah Subhanahu wa Taala society. So the submission to Allah Subhanahu wa Taala society has to lead from Islam, and we should never let our confidence be challenged. We should never let our voices be silenced, because that's not what Islam is about. We should never let our deen or our practice of Islam be watered down or be made more palatable as well. And there's other academic discourses around immigration politics and stuff as well. You don't want to be the good citizen as we are made out to believe that we need to be as Muslims within this country. We have to hold fast to the rope of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we have to hold fast to the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So again, as Brother Rabbani said this as well, we're working for the akhirah. Our rationality extends beyond this realm. It extends beyond this dunya. Yes, we act within the dunya before the akhirah. And to see the face of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is what we are working towards, right? So have that lens, have that, don't let structural oppressions or discriminations that you might face as a Muslim student on the ground, as an Islamic society on the ground, silence you. Don't let it from you wearing the hijab. Don't let it from you going to the prayer room to pray. Don't let it you being involved with your Islamic society. Don't let it you silencing yourself within courses and within academic debates to sort of think this is what the academic discourse is. So I have to go with the flow and I have to take with it. And if Islam is being criticized, I just have to accept it. As again, Brother Rabbani said this as well. But if your events are being cancelled, your speakers, your Islamic society is being monitored more than any other society, your funds are being withheld, you're not being allowed to have speakers or organizations like Cage speak in your university campus, then you should be resisting that, then you should be fighting that. And we as FOSIS, we are here to protect you. We're here to advocate for you. We're here to lobby on your behalf. So get in touch with us. So yeah, be active, stand up to injustice. That's the prophetic example. And FOSIS, I would also say, like within the Islamophobia campaign, we're telling Islamic societies to educate their membership on what is Islamophobia, how they experience Islamophobia on the ground, root your conceptualization within religion and within Islam. FOSIS will be doing the speaker tour in a few months' time. So, reach out to us. If you're experiencing issues with your student union, with your university, or any sort of Islamophobia that you're experiencing, log it, get in touch with us. We have a student affairs team which supports Muslim students and Islamic societies. We'll be doing a data collection process soon where we'll be talking to Islamic societies on what their experience of Islamophobia is. So yeah, just carry on advocating, carry on lobbying. We as FOSIS are here to support you on that. We are the voice of Muslim students across the country. And yeah, we also offer an Islamophobia training for students' unions as well as Islamic society. So if you want that Islamophobia training as an Islamic society, or you want your students' union to have that understanding of what Islamophobia means for Muslim students on the ground, then reach out to us. We can do that. We do that training for student unions as well. So you can reach out to us on student.affairs@fosis.org.uk. So yeah, we're here to help you advocate. We're here to help you lobby and be your voice. And I think, yeah, there is, people think that there is power within institutions and power within academic discourses or power within political legitimacies. I would say that we should remember this, the power is within the communities, power is within the grassroots, power is with the Muslim student voice. And we just need to have the confidence to own it, to carry on this resistance and counter Islamophobia. So that would be my message for the Muslim youth listening.
Jazakallah khair, and Jazakallah khair to all of you for your contributions and sharing your experience. I think it's warming and heartwarming to see in a time where there's so much disunity, to see such unity amongst our community on what Islamophobia is, why it's a problem. And even though we might have slight strategic, nuances in how we want to address it, the unanimous consensus amongst everyone seems to be that, look, this is something that we must address and it's our duty to address, inshallah. So Jazakallah khair for coming, and Jazakallah khair for sharing your thoughts with us. I think inshallah we will end there. Thank you to everyone who who's tuning in and who watched. You can follow us on Instagram and on other social media on MYN_UK, or you can visit our website muslimyouthnetwork.com. So we'll end it there. Jazakallah khair. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.